Mental health issues like depression and anxiety are rampant, especially amongst men. And while we have made some great strides to destigmatize mental health struggles, there still is a long way to go. Today's guests know this journey all too well, and they are on a mission to empower men to take action when it comes to their mental health. They understand that real lasting change doesn't happen overnight with a magic pill or a quick fix. It takes work, support, and small consistent steps in the right direction. These two guys have walked the walk, and now they're talking the talk on their podcast, The Fit Mess, to help spread the message and build a community for men seeking better mental health. Get ready for an honest, unfiltered conversation about stepping into your best self in the second half of life. Hello and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm the founder of The Silver Edge, and our mission is to help you build and maintain a lean, healthy body that you love for the rest of your life, so that you can show up in the second half of your life as the healthiest, strongest, most vital version of yourself. We have a great show for you today. Jeremy Grater and Zach Turner are with us today, and they're going to share their perspectives on the state of men's mental health. If you or someone you love struggles with depression or anxiety, stick around. This episode is jam-packed with actionable advice to overcome and persevere. My guests today are Jeremy Grater and Zach Turner. After struggling with his weight and mental health for years, Zach discovered the power of small, consistent changes through activities like running and yoga. And now Zach is on a mission to share the tools that help transform his own wellness journey in hopes of helping others find peace. After injuring his knee over a decade ago, Jeremy was forced onto a bike, which led him to discover meditation and other practices that have gradually improved his physical and mental health. With 20 years in broadcasting and podcasting, Jeremy now shares his imperfect journey to wellness in hopes of helping other men feel less alone. Together, Jeremy and Zach are the masterminds behind The Fit Mess, a podcast and resource for men who want to make a change for better mental health. I started our interview today by asking Jeremy how he got interested in the subject of men's health.
Mine started like in the weirdest way possible, for me anyways. It started with a dumb knee injury. I literally got out of bed one day and just stepped the wrong way and collapsed, couldn't put weight on my knee, didn't know what was going on. Lots of doctor's appointments and physical therapies and scans later. It was just some sort of nerve damage that, I was just going to have to deal with. But in the process of all of those doctor visits, PT appointments, the physical therapist at the time said, hey, given what's going on with you now, given your family history, if you don't start getting on a bike, you are going to end up replacing both of your knees. And that was terrifying to me. I was like, I don't want to go through that. I don't want to repeat that story. So, at first I thought that's nuts. I'm not going to get on a bike. I'll do something else. So I went and complained to my brother because that's how I dealt with all of my problems at the time. And he just said, look, dummy, you just have to decide you're the weird guy that rides his bike to work every day. Just make that choice, and all of a sudden, you'll be doing it. And for whatever reason, the way he said it at the time he said it was what I needed to hear when I needed to hear it. And within a week, I bought a bike and started riding 9 miles to work every day. And the weirdest thing happened on that journey every day is that I discovered how much peace I found in being present in the moment. As dangerous as the moment was riding through city streets, I had to pay attention to right now. Not what I said yesterday, not what I'm going to do next week, not what's going to happen at work today, right now. And it was just the most incredible space to occupy for 45 minutes every day. And so I went home to my wife and I was like, man, how do I incorporate this more into my life? And she said, well, I have no idea. Why don't you go talk to a therapist? Found a therapist who taught me all about, meditation and Buddhism and just these different practices to find more of that ability to bring the power of now into my life. And that was door number 2, right? It just was like step after step. It wasn't like somebody said, here's a path, follow this path. It was just get on a bike. That bike took me to a therapist. That therapist took me to cold therapy. That cold therapy took me to breath work. It just has been one thing after another for the last, decade and a half of just trying new things and figuring out when I open this door, man, what's on the other side? And, along the way I met Zach and found out that he was sort of on a similar mission and was a couple of steps ahead of me. So he and I started hanging out more and learning more from each other. And I'll let him tell his part of the story.
Well, actually, yeah, Zach, before we get to your part of the story, Jeremy, I'd like to back up a little bit. You mentioned this, It sounded like kind of a freak accident. You sprang out of bed and you tweaked your knee. How old were you? How long ago was that?
I mean, it was my daughter was maybe not even a year old, so it must have been about 12 years ago that happened.
So about 12 years ago, and like you said, that just sort of set up this cascade of events where all of a sudden now oddly enough, you find yourself riding your bike. You mentioned being thrown into this situation where you have to be present, you have to be in the here and now, and that kind of dangerous ride, and that just led from one thing to another. So we'll definitely come back to that. I'd like to poke that apart a little bit. But Zach,
sure.
what's your story? How'd you end up here?
Yeah. So how do I condense 44 years into about maybe a minute and a half here? So
we got plenty of time. Take your time.
Yeah. So my story, I mean, it really does start when I was born. Like I had, a mother who was extremely neglectful and on the abuse scale, right? And that, like, I was 4 years old. I was left at home for 4 or 5 days by myself with nothing in the fridge but like raw hamburger. Like CPS had to come in and take me away from my mom. So like just really bad home life up until about 6 years old, and then went to my dad, and he did the best he could, but he grew up during the Great Depression. He was 50 when I was born. There was other struggles there. There was a whole bunch of things, and I'm a highly sensitive person, so I didn't deal well with being picked on by your father when he's, just trying to be humorous and trying to love you in the way he knows how to, but it like deeply scarred me. So for the first 20 years of my life, it was just this genetic anxiety, this genetic kind of depression that was intensified by the way I was raised, the experiences that I had as a child, and just overall trauma that I had. So when I was 22, 23 years old, I mean, you can see me today, but I was like almost 300 pounds. I smoked cigarettes, I was drinking, I was doing drugs, I was in and out of jail, I was all of those things. And I was just trying to cope with life the best way I knew how. And there had to be another way. And I met who's now my ex-wife, but she was my wife for a long time. I met her, and she kind of helped me along and like showed me a couple of different ways. And I ended up losing a bunch of weight, got my first job right out of college. Took me a little bit of time to get back to college because I did it a weird way. But, I got my first job and I was still smoking cigarettes, and my boss told me, if I'd known you smoked, I would have never hired you. And like, that was kind of a wake up call for me back then. And I quit smoking, and then I started running because there was a running group at work, and I was a social butterfly and I wanted to be part of that stuff. And like weight just started melting off. And by the physical exercise, that actually started leading me towards like a little bit more stability in my mental health, so I could take on the next challenge and the next challenge and the next challenge. I mean, that was over 20 years ago that happened now. And over the years, I've now gone, oh, well, that worked. Let me try the next thing. And that worked. Let me try the next thing. That didn't work. 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 I mean, a million things didn't work, but I've found over the years my tool chest of things, but I was able to deep dive into my anxiety and my depression and just really repair all that trauma that I had, and like come up with tools and techniques to keep the weight off, the physical health there, the mental health there, to the point where I'm 44 now. I'm the happiest, healthiest I've ever been in my entire life. But Jeremy and I, when we met 12, 13 years ago, our wives actually knew each other. And we're like, oh, well, they both like Star Wars, and they're both kind of geeks and dorks, and like these guys need to talk. So we met, and like our relationship built over a few years, and we started getting vulnerable with each other. And like Jeremy said, I was a few steps ahead. So I was like sharing things that worked for me, but I was also sharing things that didn't work for me in the hopes that maybe it would work for him. And we were getting really vulnerable around being new dads and like being a boss or a subordinate at work or a friend, or like all these different things that guys have to do. And we don't talk about how it makes us feel or the struggles we're going through. And we got really vulnerable, and, it was so helpful for both of us. Not only was I listening to him and going, hey, I'm not alone, I was able to tell him my struggles and my issues. And he was able to find out he wasn't alone. It was so useful. And Jeremy's been doing podcasting for a long, long time, and his old show had just come to an end. So I came at him one day and I was like, look, we should do these conversations, like these things. Let's do it on a podcast and like put it out there to the world. And he said, hell no. He shot me down. He absolutely shot me down.
Right on. Well, obviously something's changed. You guys are the co-hosts of The Fit Mess, as we talked about in the intro here. So before we get to how that show came about, Zach, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper. Both you and Jeremy talked about just this vulnerable space, emotional health, mental health, going to counseling, therapy, things like that. Talk to us a little bit about the stigma that seems to be around mental health, specifically when it comes to men's health and men's mental health.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was raised this way. It was, you don't talk about emotions, you bury them. If you hurt yourself, you get up, you rub dirt on it, and you move on as if nothing ever happened. And that's like, we are human beings. Like, the emotions are there. And the more you bury them, the more you stuff them down, like the worse the explosion is going to be when it all comes out and comes to the surface. And we have just learned that we aren't taking anything away from being men by talking about, like, I can still change a tire. I just replaced a toilet. Like, I can do all the things that men do. What we're talking about is like adding some additional pieces and being aware of your emotions and talking through your emotions and being vulnerable about them. That makes you just a better human being all around. But yeah, the stigma is there. Like, men don't talk about these things because we were raised not to talk about these things, and you just get through it and you deal with it. And this is for me and for probably thousands and thousands of guys out there. Like I said, the more you bury that, the bigger the explosion is going to be. And it's just not healthy overall. Like, well-rounded mental health is not good if you're burying that stuff down.
Yeah, Jeremy, I would imagine you probably agree. Is that kind of similar to your thoughts then, that just were you raised in that similar way where we're taught just to really repress, it's not considered manly to vent your emotions, etc.? Or
I don't know that it was explicit in the way that it was for Zach. In my case, the example was drink the pain away. That was what I learned growing up. I heard a lot of, he needs to toughen up, that sort of thing. There wasn't necessarily the shut up and rub dirt on it, like the same sort of extreme, but it's just the example that was shown was one that was not healthy. And up until really 7 years ago, I had no idea how much I was following that example and drinking the pain away. And when I experimented with quitting, and it was just going to be for a month because it was, it wasn't something that I saw as a problem. It was just like, I wonder what that would feel like. I realized very quickly how much every time something hurt, I wanted to rub some beer on it. And even now, I mean, it's been 7 years and there's still many times when, some inching toward depression, some emotional situations coming up, something's hard, something's challenging. Man, I want to run. I want to escape it. I want to just whatever, to not feel it, to not process it. So that is something that I've had to decide now. It's just not a part of my life anymore because I want to break that cycle. That is generational. That is what men in my family have done for as long back as we can find, is that when something hurts, drink it away. And I just couldn't live like that anymore. And I didn't want that to be the example I showed my kids now that, dad can't feel. Now dad cries a lot. That's the story that my kids see, but at least they see that dad has feelings and he can share them and he can explain them. So yeah, I mean, to some degree, that stigma, I definitely see it everywhere. I see it still within me. I was hanging out with a friend that has a son. We were going for a hike, and as we're walking along this trail, the kid fell down and he started crying and he was hurt. Part of me went, come on, dude, you fell down. What's the big deal? Let's keep going. If it had been my daughter, I would have not had that same reaction. There's just something ingrained in my DNA that just told me, like, come on, kid, toughen up. You just fell down. It's a scrape. What's the big deal? But I caught myself in the middle of it and just thinking, like, wow, that, like, me, Mr. Sensitive, Mr. In touch with his feelings guy, went immediately to rub some dirt on it and let's keep going, bro. Like, yeah. So it's drilled into us from a very early age.
It is, and it might even be archetypical a little bit, right? I mean, we're up against hundreds of thousands of years of evolution here, where there's kind of this very literal, in a physical sense, only the strong survive, and it would have been advantageous for us to endure pain, etc., in order just to procreate and continue our line, I suppose. And there has to be, I suppose, there's an intersection, right? There's a line somewhere between traditional masculinity. We're going to put aside the whole toxic piece of that, but just traditional masculinity and this kind of vulnerability that you're talking about. And I don't see those things, and I'm guessing you guys would agree, as mutually exclusive. But is there a place, in your guys' opinion, for the way we treat, say, a boy who falls down and scrapes his knee and a girl who falls down and scrapes their knee? Should we treat those identical? Are there differences? Should we raise children? I mean, I'm just curious, just where you think that intersection is, or is there a line there for you guys?
I think to me, they're like you mentioned, like sort of genetically or like in our DNA, there is that line that exists, and we have to be, we have to use this box on top of our shoulders to see better, right? We have to see that this kid, boy or girl, is highly sensitive. Respond to that. This kid can take a tumble and just needs to be reminded, you're okay, you're tough, let's keep going. So just being aware of the human being in front of you, no matter what parts they have or what they identify with, and playing to those personality traits or those issues that they live with, that's the way to do it. Between my two daughters, if one of them fell down and scraped her knee, it would have to be a much softer approach. The other one's a little tougher, and you can go, are you okay? You good? Do you have 5 fingers on the hand still? Okay, cool. Let's keep going. Right. And she would be like, yeah, okay. So it's really just knowing who you're dealing with. It's not black and white. It's not as simple as boys this way, girls this way. It's what's their deal and what do they need to hear from me in this moment?
Yep. Totally agree with that. I think from my perspective, like as I was growing up, and I'm sure Jeremy was the same way, like both of us probably could have used like that softer touch, but my dad had no idea how to, I don't even think he knew how to do it with his daughters, but he just had no idea how to do it. He was raised a certain way. He didn't have access to resources. He didn't know any other way to do it. So he did it the same way he was raised in the 1920s and 30s. And that's just how it went.
Yeah, it's that ancestral programming, I think, that's just kind of, it's that recurring thing. And it sounds to me like both you guys are cycle breakers, right? You've just come in and you've disrupted this multi-generational, and I think that's happening more and more. Is now we were just talking a couple minutes about just this stigma around mental health and men showing emotion, et cetera. Do you feel like we're entering a new era? Is it becoming more and more accepted for, let's just say guys our age, right? I'm almost 60. You guys are almost 50, it sounds like. So 40s to 60s, just that generation of men. Is it becoming more accepted for us to act in this way, do you feel like?
I totally think so. I mean, just going back to the example of my dad, he had no resources to know that there was a different way to do things. I mean, we are fortunately raising children in a day and age where we have the internet, we have research, we have so much information. And all it takes is that spark of curiosity of, what if there's another way to do this? What if I'm wrong? Like, what if there's another thing? And I feel blessed to be raising my daughter at this moment in time and watching this shift happen. The emotional conversations I have with my daughter, like if it had happened 20 years ago, it never would have happened because the resources weren't there. The knowledge wasn't there. Like there is evidence out there that you need to treat people a certain way based on their makeup. Like it is not one size fits all. So yeah, I think things are changing. However, like anything else, right? It's going to take generations for this to change. Even though the information is there, you've got people who won't accept it, will believe it's false science, will just, nope, this is the way I've always done it. They don't have that spark of curiosity. This is how I was raised. This is how we've always done it. Why change now? So it is changing, but I think we have a couple of generations at least before this stuff really becomes normal.
Yeah, I think I turned out all right might be one of the biggest barriers to progress that men are facing in terms of evolution from this issue.
No, well, it's interesting you say that because that's kind of my story, right? I was raised in a very traditional masculine sort of overbearing father, and I myself, Jeremy, have said those exact same words. Well, I turned out fine. What didn't kill me made me stronger, and I will say this as I reflect back on that, because I've certainly done some deep diving into this, but there is a kernel of truth there. Although there were some extremely painful, emotional, physical, painful points in my childhood, and it messed me up as an adolescent. I had Zach, I think you and I had some things in common there, but I did turn out all right. And there's some of that fortitude, some of that toughness, some of that self-reliance are now, I count that as part of my superpowers. Now, if I could go back and change things, could I say, well, I'd much rather have an idyllic childhood? Probably, right. But maybe not, because that's who I am today. So if I'm going to just kind of play devil's advocate here and say, well, what is the role then for overcoming adversity and for that sort of mental fortitude and the toughness? How do you see that playing out in kind of this softer, gentler version of, let's just keep on the track of parenting here?
Yeah. It's the timing of this is interesting. I was literally having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a therapist, and he's also here in BC. He grew up in Canada. I grew up in the States. And I've been talking about this a lot with people in sort of this self-help space about what is the role of trauma in childhood. No kid gets out of childhood without scars. It's part of the deal. You're not going to have a perfect childhood. If you did, the minute you lost your job at McDonald's, you would be shattered, right? Like you would have there'd be no grit, there'd be no toughness, no way to deal with adversity because you never learned that sometimes life doesn't go your way. However, I was discussing this with my therapist friend, and he was saying, I hear that, but I think that's also a uniquely American perspective. Because in Canada, in his growing up, everyone he knew, there was no alcoholic father. There was no trauma, right? There was toughness. There was bad grades, like normal sort of softer hardships for kids to go through. But he was making the comparison that between, American culture and Canadian culture, and this is just the two he has to pull from. I'm sure globally it's different everywhere. Sure. But we are so used to that Gen X kid in the 90s and the 80s that was a latchkey kid, that was home alone, that was neglected, that had alcoholic parents, that had drug abuse in the home, that had abuse. And we chalk it up to, oh, well, that's just being a kid, right? Like I dismiss it all the time as, garden variety trauma that I had alcoholism in the home. But for a lot of the world, that's not normal. That's not just growing up. That's not just childhood scars. So there is a line clearly between abuse, neglect, terrible parenting, and growing up as a kid and getting a few bumps and bruises on the way. I think that we have grown really accustomed to really bad parenting and just chalked it up to that's just part of the deal. And when I think that there needs to be more of a cultural shift. And it's not necessarily at the fault of anyone. We repeat the patterns that our parents teach us. This information is new. The stuff that we're talking about is new, a few decades old. But the information is there, and you have to be able to get past, I turned out okay. Yeah, I did turn out okay. We live in a nice house. We do okay. The kids are happy. They're thriving. How much better could we all be doing if I had learned earlier to get curious about my problems? If I had put the bottle down a few years earlier than I did? If I had not allowed I turned out okay to be the reason to not try harder, how much better could we have done? So to me, that's the line, is accepting that perhaps what you accept as what everyone went through is not what everyone went through. And it was extremely bad. And get curious about why you now react to pain, why you now react to stressful situations the way you do. Can you do them better, or are you repeating what you learned? There's too much information to not take action to do better. Even if you already feel like you're doing pretty well, you can do better. So to me, that would be the lesson, is just like, we can't stop growing as people and trying to reduce the number and level of scars that our kids come out of childhood with.
Yeah. And I want to add to so I have these conversations with my daughter. So like you, if I could go back and change my childhood, I would not, because the level of resiliency, the survival instinct, the go-getter attitude that I have today is a direct result of, what I experienced as a child. And I look at my daughter and I'm like, okay, how do I get her to have those same sets of skills without making her eat raw hamburger out of the fridge for 3 days? Right. So I really do try and focus the energy on her, to challenge her to do things that she's not necessarily capable of, that she's going to fail. She's going to experience pain. So kids don't have to experience the same pain, but like pain is relative, right? So the pain that I felt as a kid eating hamburger and knowing my mom was gone, right? I didn't know how bad to feel about that. My daughter will feel just as bad if she doesn't make the volleyball team or, something like that. So like working with them and navigating those pains and making sure they're feeling them, they're processing them. Like you can still use those lesser extreme examples to help them build resiliency, to make them a go-getter, to get those things in place. And that's what I try and do. But by no means am I going to leave her for 4 days by herself when she's 4 years old.
I was gonna say, just send them to middle school. That'll teach them some resilience pretty quickly.
Yeah,
True.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm curious if this is something you guys wrestle with. It's certainly something I have. Now my kids are grown. I have adult children now, but I'm concerned that I too am a cycle breaker, and my wife also came from a pretty traumatic childhood. So we both had this mission that we weren't going to raise kids the way we were raised, and we did. But I feel like maybe there was an overcorrection in there. I feel like we went too far the other way, because you're right. The kids, there's no way you're going to escape, let's just say adolescence, for example, without all kinds of psychic scars. That's just a tough time for everybody. And I'm just wondering where that line is. And I'm still curious to that. Where is that line, right? Where is, like you were saying there, Zach, I still want my child to try. I want my child to be in a position where they fail and they learn from that and they fail forward, not fail back. And that's a lofty concept, but how do we apply that? How do we not overcorrect? Because I think I've looked around, I see that a lot, right? A lot of my peers grow up in very similar environments, right? We're broke, we're poverty stricken and kind of rough and tumble sort of an upbringing as a kid. And Jeremy, going back to that, hey, I turned out okay. And then I look at my kids and they've never really had any of those big challenges. They've all had challenges. Like you said, we're not going to get away from that. I'm just curious, is there a line for you guys? Is that something that you're thinking about? And I'm not talking even about the extreme, like, 4 days as a 4-year-old and eating my hamburger out of the fridge.
Right.
We're not talking about that, but is there a way that we can raise the next generation to be somewhere in between, maybe coddled and just downright, too far on the other side of that?
Yeah. I always think of Ryan Holiday when he says, give your kids a good life, not an easy life. Right. Like that. We don't want to just hand them a silver spoon and have them have this false belief that the world's this kind and gentle place. So to me, I try to tell my kids that whenever there's some sort of a challenge, something they're considering doing, that they will always regret not doing it way more than trying and failing. So I try to encourage them, especially when they're scared, because as I've learned way too late in life, if there's an obstacle, that's the way. If I can get them to try things and fail safely, it's under control. I know there's a possibility that that's going to fail, and I can coach them through that. It's a controlled failure. I can be a part of that and coach them through it and tell them how to manage their emotions, or coach them on how to manage their emotions through it. Of course, things are going to happen that we can't expect. And that's when I try to teach them about what is within your control and what's not. Right? If you can just really focus on what role do I play in this failure, this hardship, this pain that I'm going through? Am I the victim, or can I learn something from this so that next time this doesn't happen, or that next time it happens and it doesn't hurt as bad? To me, I see a lot of what you're talking about, a lot of just like coddling and you see the videos on all the time of the guy walking down the hallway, of the 80s kid that bumps into the doorway and he kind of shrugs it off. The 90s kid's like, oh, my shoulder. And then the 2000s kid like collapses on the floor. Like there's this evolution, I think, of this role reversal where we've tried to like make it easier on our kids. That's the mistake. It's not supposed to be easier. It's supposed to be good, but not easy. And so the more that we can be aware that pain is going to come and to help our kids understand how to deal with it and how to manage their emotions through it, that to me, it's hard to say that like, where's the line without being like, in what situation would you do X? Yeah, but that for me is the difference, is like, am I giving them an easy life or am I giving them a good life? And if it falls too far into easy, then I got to find more ways to push them to get out of their comfort zone and see what struggle really is.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely love it. Well, thanks for indulging me there. I just wanted to kind of get some of your thoughts there. It sounds like you're both raising young girls, if I'm not mistaken. So hats off to you. I've got a son and a daughter. A lot of fun doing that. Now, in the intro to your podcast, The Fit Mess, I can't remember which is which, or actually, I probably could guess by now, but you say something along the lines of one of you is looking past and depression, one looking forward, and anxiety. And depression and anxiety, talk a little bit about are those the big ones when it comes to men's mental health? What are you seeing out there with other guys? What are we struggling with in today's culture? Is it mostly depression and anxiety?
I think it stems from those two for the most part. I mean, there's subcategories of both of those that you could dive into. You know, self-worth ties to both of them. Imposter syndrome ties to both of them. But like you could really summarize a great deal of the mental health struggles that most men are facing with those two things. Because I mean, so I'm the anxious one, by the way. I'm sure you figured that out. Right? With the way that I was raised, the childhood I had, everything, as well as the genetics, like I'm always looking, 10 steps ahead to try and figure out, what do I need to avoid? What do I need to do? How am I going to take care of my family? What if this happens? What if that happens? And that's just one method of it. And then there's the depression side, which, I mean, Jeremy can talk more about that, but I think it all stems from one of those two things. We're either looking at the past and feeling woe is me for everything that's happened to me and I feel like the victim, or we're looking forward going, everyone's going to find out I'm a fraud and they're going to find out and I'm going to fail and I'm going to be a loser. Those two things to me are 95% of all the mental health issues that are going around. Again, there are specifics and there's details and there's different types of anxiety, different types of depression, but those are the two main ones in my opinion.
And I think we talk about them because they're the ones that we live with most intimately. I feel like to some degree, I don't know if you feel this way, Zach, but it's like one side of the coin is depression, one side is anxiety. And I'm constantly just trying to keep it in the air because when it lands, either way, it's bad, right? I'm either freaked out about something or I'm pissed off about something. So I'm just constantly trying to keep it at bay. Like, how do I keep it from landing in one way or another? I mean, I'm talking to you 1 week after being removed from the longest major depressive episode I've had probably in my life. It lasted about 6 weeks. Just couldn't, I mean, I couldn't, I have the toolkit, right? I know all the things. I talk about them on my show every week. I couldn't find the strength to pick one of them up and try. So I just would focus on what little thing can I do. And for the most part, it was walk, right? Just go put one foot in front of the other. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about how many weights are on the bar. You don't have to worry about how much protein is in it. It was literally just go get in the 10,000 steps. The robot will count it. Just keep moving forward until you hit it. Just little things like that I have to do. Because otherwise, typically, I would just be in that dark place and I would just go hide in a dark room for days and be completely, useless to everybody around me, feel guilt and shame about that. When I did finally come out of it, I did nothing, let myself down, felt guilt and shame about that. So then the spiral would continue. And it's just a horrible place to be in. And it's not necessarily, gosh, I feel bad about the past. It's just at a certain point, if untreated, and even when treated, depression becomes the song you know. It just becomes the one you play. When something triggers it, that's all it takes to be like, yeah, there's another reason everything you believed for most of your life is true. And it just snowballs and snowballs. And then you get a phone call that amplifies it. And you just, all of a sudden, there you are, stuck, looking in the mirror again, going, see, this is all you are. This is the real you. This other mask you keep putting on for the world, that's nonsense. This is the real you. This is... Just get comfortable with never interacting with other people or being smiling or, useful to other people ever again. It becomes really convincing. So you have to actively work and seek help when you're in those places, because in my experience, it's nearly impossible to get out of alone. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us can resonate with what you're saying there, right? That downward spiral. And Zach, you had talked about that imposter syndrome. And I feel personally like that's one of the big things that keeps people stuck where they are. They just, who am I to, I remember the first time I decided I was going to do a podcast. I'm like, well, who am I? Who am I to have a podcast about over 50 health and wellness? And, there's all these and I don't know why that is, why we're hardwired as human beings to just have that negative tape playing over and over and over in our heads. But let's face it, the majority of people, most of their thoughts are negative self thoughts are negative self thoughts, and that just seems to be a pretty common piece of the human condition. And I think that you're right. We have to figure out ways to rise above that, right? I mean, Jeremy, you said you had to work at it and you can't do it alone. You need to get help. So let's kind of segue this. Somebody listening to this saying, yeah, man, I feel you because I hear you because I feel it, right? That's where I am. I have depression. I was raised in a way that really screwed me up, or I'm worried about the future. Or I don't feel like I'm good enough. Both of you guys have used, sounds like, health, nutrition as part of your toolkit. You've used therapy. You've talked about those kinds of things. What's our prescription for somebody who's just starting on this journey and just maybe they're just realizing, hey, I'm in this place and it's time for me to do something about it? Where do we start and what do we do?
Yeah. So the one thing to fix all your problems, just kidding. There's no one thing.
Right. Dang it. It's 1,000. Yeah.
No, it's actually two things for me. One is that curiosity aspect, like really opening your mind and being curious about things and looking at the things that you believe and questioning whether or not they're true and being okay with being wrong, right? No, none of us like to be wrong, but in these moments, being wrong can actually be beneficial for you long term. And then the other thing while you're doing that is go find a coach. If that's a therapist, if that's a nutritionist, if that's, somebody who can help you lift weights, be at the gym, somebody who can help you along the way and you can tell your problems to. Jeremy and I talk about this all the time. Being vulnerable is not just whining, woe is me, these are my problems, this and that. Nobody's going to know what help you need unless you tell them what you need. And being vulnerable is just that. When you're vulnerable, when you air these things out there, the coach, the person, the therapist, the gym trainer, they're going to show up and they're going to help you. So, those are the two things. Be curious about what you believe and go get a coach. For whatever it is you're trying to battle, get a coach, because you can do it alone. It's going to go a lot easier if you find somebody who knows what they're doing, can support you along the way.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. Well said. Jeremy, you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I firmly believe in the whole idea that the body keeps the score, and that whatever stuff you went through as a kid, whatever unresolved issues you're still carrying around, that is literally energy stored in your body that is begging to be moved. And every time that you don't treat it, every time you don't deal with it, it burrows in a little bit deeper and makes room for more. So that, like Zach said earlier, the deeper you bury it, when it finally blows up, it's bad. So it's the advice nobody likes to hear. It's the advice I don't like to hear. I don't like to say it, but you got to move your body. You have to get off your butt. Like, if it is go walk, start there, cool. Walk around the block, walk to the end of the driveway, walk to the end of the block tomorrow, keep walking. Then all of a sudden you're like, this is getting kind of easy. Start jogging. Then add in a little weight training. I can't tell you how I hate the gym. I don't like it. When I get into my routine and I'm there, I can get okay with it. But I'm not there looking in the mirror going, how come my muscles aren't bigger? How come I'm not losing weight? How come I'm in there oftentimes crying because I'm doing something hard. I forced myself to get out the door, to put the shoes on and go do the thing that's hard. And a lot of times I have to go to the dark side and, pull up some anger at my dad or something that, that I never dealt with, to lift that weight a little more, to move it. Because otherwise it just owns me. It just sits in my body and controls the way I think and feel. And I've done enough, somatic therapy work, just like literally body movement work, to process these ancient, terrible feelings that I hold on to. I just believe that's the thing that holds so much of us back. We sit here staring at these computers 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And then we, have a glass of wine or 2 or 5 at night to deal with it. And we wake up and have 4 cups of coffee to get going, to do it all again. And we haven't walked, we haven't moved. And so everything just sits there going, I have this primal need to expend energy, let it out. So, honestly, it's the basics that every wellness, leader, expert, whatever is going to tell you, but like exercise, meditation, journaling, gratitude, like these basic things are repeated all the time because they're basic and nobody does them because they want to spend $10,000 on a course that has the secret answer and the 3 simple steps to solving the problem.
Yeah.
But it's the basics. You got to do them. You have to commit. You have to accept that you are not going to see results for a long time, and it's going to be hard. No, it's not going to be solved in 2 weeks, but in 6 months, you're going to go, I haven't felt like that in a while. Wow, I haven't felt like that since last year. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's because of all these little things I've been doing all along the way that, as it turns out, make me feel better.
Yeah, those little wins stack up. We talk on this show all the time about the importance of movement, of the importance of eating real nourishing food that will actually nourish your body, of getting good sleep, of finding a way. You probably can't control your stress, but you control your reaction to stress. So back to that gratitude, that journaling, that prayer practice, whatever that looks like for you. Yeah. And we talk on this show a lot about the physical, biological benefits, and they're tremendous, right? Especially for my age demographic. I'm talking mostly to people 50, 60, some of them they're in their 70s for healthy aging, right? But I think the most underappreciated aspect of that prescription, that movement prescription, that healthy living prescription is mental health. I think that really, I think we miss that a lot. And to your point, we tend to, if you go to just Western medicine, you say, hey, I feel depression, I feel anxious, you're probably going to get a pill. If you're lucky, you might get therapy, but we're probably going to, again, that quick fix, we're going to treat the symptom and send you on your way, as opposed to this very difficult, frankly, lifelong change. If you want something to change permanently, you're going to have to make some permanent change. And I think that a lot of people have a hard time grasping that. Now, Jeremy, I love the way you were talking about change there as this progressive thing. And I just was listening to one of your recent podcast episodes where you guys were picking apart I think the way you said it is it's evolution, not revolution, right? We're not trying to boil the ocean. We're not saying, like most of us on New Year's Eve, we're going to make some outrageous New Year's Eve resolution, which will last for a week and a half if you're lucky. So talk to us a little bit about that, the progress of small steps and the effect that can have over time for somebody who is looking. We're all conditioned for that quick fix. Sell me on why we should care about these small steps and why that's so critical.
Yeah. I'll just tell you my story. I was, a mid-30s new dad who unknowingly was drinking his problems away, 70 pounds heavier than I am now, depressed, in a toxic job that I hated, that my doctor literally told me every year to quit because it was killing me. Just on the cycle every month going, how do I get a little bit less deeper into debt this month? Just, the cycle that I think a lot of guys are on. And like I said, I hurt my knee, got on a bike, and I was like, well, this sucks. Oh, wait, no, this is teaching me something. This is kind of cool. And then I learned, meditation, I can do this anytime. Wow. Okay. Now I'm going to do that. All of a sudden, my therapist described it as, swirling a glass of water that's got a bunch of sediment in it. And like, you're constantly just shaking that thing up, trying to figure out how to see through it. When if you just set it down, it all settles at the bottom. There's always this clarity all of a sudden. So through these practices of just being more present, I got more curious, started talking to Zach, and I was like, oh, wow, you've been losing a lot of weight. What's going on? He told me what he was doing. I adapted it to my way, lost a bunch of weight. I, discovered Wim Hof and was like, cold water, that seems crazy, but I do wear shorts year round. Now you can't keep me out of the lake down the street that's freezing half the year. It's all of these little things that, again, had somebody handed me a book 12, 13 years ago and said, these are all of the things you need to do to manage your mental health, I would have said, no way. I don't even like to read. Are you kidding me? Get that thing out of here. Now I know that I've been writing that book myself for the last decade and a half to give myself the tools to manage in a better way. That, those little steps included getting off of the antidepressants that I thought were the quick fix, and they made things worse. Getting off of alcohol because as it turns out, I just wasn't feeling anything and wanted to feel something. Lost a bunch of weight. It all just happened because of little steps. I didn't wake up January 1st and say, I'm a new man. Here we go. It was just like, let's try this. And don't get me wrong, like Zach said, there's 1,000 things I've tried that I don't do anymore, or that I did a couple times. Like, this is not it for me. Doesn't resonate. But when you find the ones that do, usually they're the basics that everyone tells you to do. But that's the hard part, is you have to accept that. And you have to accept that it is a consistent effort every day that gets you closer to who you're trying to become.
Yeah. I liken it to investing to some sense, right? Like, I've got a finance mind, right? If you are putting money away and using compound interest, right? Your effort's going to remain the same for the most part, because every new thing that you put into it will become part of your habit. will become part of your life and it won't be that hard anymore. So your investment's going to remain the same. So like if you're just putting $100 a month away into an account starting at a certain age, you're still doing $100 a month, but then interest starts hitting, right? And you've got that compounding interest. You get 20 years down the road and you look back and you go, oh my God, how did I do that? It's the same thing like with your body. And that $100 never changes. That effort doesn't have to change. It's just knowing that I'm going to try this, that didn't work. And then you replace it with something else. I'm going to try this, that did work. And then it just becomes part of your routine. And it's not hard to do anymore once it becomes part of your routine.
Yeah, right on. We talk on this show all the time about small steps and how they can have a huge impact when done consistently over time. And we're also really big proponents of self-experimentation, which I think both of you just alluded to, right? I've tried this, in my own health and wellness journey, I've done it all, right? I went vegan for a while. I cut out all the carbs for a while. I swung from one extreme to the other. I was a CrossFitter for a while. I was doing marathons and triathlons for a while. All of these things, and some of them served me, some of them didn't, but I learned from every single one of them. And along the way, I've just tried to, that James Clear Atomic Habits, just these days, if I can be 1% better every day, Zach, to your point, that there's just exponential returns on that in the long run, right? To your point, if I start a new habit, I probably am not going to notice anything dramatic in the first week, month, several months, maybe even, but down the line certainly can have some really, really big impact. I'm curious about what you guys think about, Jeremy, you just made reference to, antidepressants. What is the role of traditional Western medicine, do you feel, specifically when it comes to men's or mental health period for anybody listening? Where do you fall on the prescribing of meds for in some extreme cases, rarely? How do you guys feel about that whole prescription medicine space for mental health, for treating?
I'm going to jump in on that one just because I have like this very weird relationship with medication. Like I react to medication like you wouldn't believe. So any side effect that a piece of medication has, I get it, even if it's the rarest of rarest. So I think this isn't like a blanket statement. I think many of the things that we suffer from physically and mentally can be solved with lifestyle changes, changing the way you eat, doing things differently. For me, if I eat saturated fat, my cholesterol doubles. Like, not kidding, goes above 400 if I eat red meat. My doctor wanted to put me on statins immediately. I was like, whoa, hang on. This is a long-term killer. Give me 6 months. Let me play with my diet. Let me figure this out. I'm not on statins. My cholesterol's fine because I know what works for me. So, however, there are extreme cases to things. Like, one of the people we talked to, Johan Hari, I think Jeremy he loves this guy. Like, he said it where, medication for mental health, it's not always the right thing. You want to make sure you're doing the lifestyle changes. You want to make sure you're doing the things that you can just naturally change your body with. However, there are people who are at a point in their life where they need whatever that medication can do to take them off the ledge, right? They might be about to jump. And medication can help get them back to a point where they can start repairing themselves and healing themselves. So I do think that there is a place for medication, so long as you're exploring all the options and you're looking at the natural ways, you're looking at changing your lifestyle, and you're not using it just to cover it up. Because, if I'm going to sit here and cover myself up with a medication, I'm going to go drinking, right? That's fun. I can go out partying for that. That's my viewpoint on it. Don't use medication to cover it up if you can put in the work and be curious and do the things to change your life long term. But again, there are those extreme scenarios where I think there is a place for it. Western medicine, though, is something I really grapple with because I think they try to do the right thing, but there's a lot of it that's just driven by money.
Yeah, 100%. There's a very ugly financial reality that we as a populace are more valuable sick and unhealthy and in the condition that most of us are in today, as opposed to independent, healthy, vibrant beings. And that's a shame. I rail against that all the time. And like you, Zach, I'm not against meds. I'm not against Western medicine. And look, if I have a heart attack, I want to go to the hospital. That's my best chance of getting out of that alive. But for all of these things that we're talking about, most of these lifestyle type things that can be changed by lifestyle, while it may be more difficult to incorporate that into my life and to adhere to that for the rest of my life, I feel like that is where the real value and real health and vitality is going to come from. But that's not the message that we're sold, because that's not a profitable. I mean, let's face it, but coaches, you don't see coaches driving around in Rolls Royces very often, but there's a lot of money being made in that just medical pharma food, fake food complex. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but yeah, well spoken. Yeah.
I was just going to
Jeremy, looks like you want to jump in on that. Yeah.
I just want to jump on that. I saw a statistic the other day that I believe the number is, and Google it if I'm wrong, I believe 75% of broadcast television advertising is for pharmaceutical companies. Yeah, right. 75%.
Yeah.
That is why cable TV exists, is to advertise drugs. So that tells you something. How, again, I'm on board with, I'm pro science. I'm aware that science is an evolving thing. We do the best we can with the knowledge we have, and it changes with time. Totally get it. I also know, don't take medical advice from me. I'm not a doctor, but I will tell you, as someone who took all of the antidepressants and had varying experiences to feeling nothing, to feeling worse, to feeling bliss for a while until it stopped working. They're not magical, but I think in extreme situations, you're right. They have their place. They can be used, but most of us are suffering from trying to live in a culture that is not designed to give a damn about your wellness.
Right.
You have to.
Right.
So until you change your behavior and adapt to the world, either by deciding, I don't care about that anymore. I don't need to drive the Rolls Royce. I don't need to have the biggest house in the hills. I can live a modest life, whatever it is for you. But we are living in a sick society, and trying to adapt to it is what's making us sick. So yeah, medicine has its place, but I firmly agree with what you guys are saying here too, that just you have to make changes to the way you're living to see the real results that you're trying to find.
And you're an outlier if you do, right? I mean, the norm now is to be sick and unhealthy. Mm-hmm. It just is. And it's sad that it's that way, but you have to make a conscious decision. You have to be your own healthcare advocate. You have to make tough decisions. You have to make them every day. But the trade-off is, I feel, well worth it. And, that's one of the things I wrestle with all the time. I'm self-aware enough to know that I am that annoying fit guy, right? If you give me half a chance, I'm in there with my message, man. I'm bringing the heat. I'm like a preacher on Sunday. Here comes the sermon. And I just can't help it, right? But I am aware enough to know. And one of the things I hear is people will occasionally say something along these lines, so that, Kevin, I'd love what you're saying. Love to have that, I'd like to look like you, but I'm not willing to do what you do, or I'm not. And often what they really mean is, I'm not willing to do what it takes to do that. And I think in their mind, they're thinking these, they probably think I live in the gym. This guy probably goes to the gym 7 days a week. He probably just drinks nothing but kale smoothies. And they have these ideas of what it means to be healthy. And while there's some truth to, you're going to have to make some lifestyle changes, and depending on how far back you are, maybe even some drastic ones, again, slow and over time. It's a journey, not a destination. But I feel like that just stops so many people from trying, because when they look around, one of the things in my own personal story, in my 40s, I've really just crash and burn, ended up with a multi-day hospital stay. I thought I was having a heart attack. And as I looked around at my peer group in my 40s, we were all like that. I mean, we weren't all in the hospital, but we were all unhealthy. We were all overweight. We were all stressed out of our minds. We all drank every single night as a way of managing that stress. And we had young children. It was no way to live, but it was the norm. And as I decided, hey, Ed, this isn't going to be me. It's not all downhill from here. I'm, for crying out loud, I'm in my mid 40s. And it was really, really hard to find examples. It was really hard to find community. And in fact, I had to go outside of my physical geographic community to find a new community. And basically my new community now is basically virtual. But I feel like the cards are stacked against us. And what you guys are kind of talking about is swimming upstream, right? And you've made that point a couple of times, and it's bucking the trends. It's being a rebel basically against what's being sold. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to rant quite so much, but I want to segue here again real quick as we're starting to wrap up. We mentioned your podcast, The Fit Mess, a couple of times. Why don't you tell folks listening what that's all about, why they might want to tune in?
Yeah, it like Zach said earlier, it was his idea. I said, hell no, that's ridiculous, because I said the same thing you said earlier. Who am I? Who are we? We aren't the gurus. We aren't the leaders on the mountaintop that know the way. But after doing some research, I discovered, he was already on board. I discovered I didn't have to be on the mountaintop. I just had to be, at the next bend in the trail to say, come this way. And so here we are a few steps ahead of a lot of people, a lot of those guys you described in their 40s trying to figure all this out to not end up in the hospital. And so we come on, and like Zach said, the conversations we're having here about just this open vulnerability, this pain, this struggle that it is to swim upstream, to go against the trend, to do everything the way we're not supposed to do it because our culture says we're not supposed to. But we just try to share what we're going through and the tools that we discover and the ways that we manage our mental health so that other people maybe have a shorter learning curve than we did, and that they feel less alone, that they find that community that isn't. I mean, I did the same thing. I was in the office looking at my peers and going, oh, well, they're all in pretty much the same shape as me. So that must be like, I'm normal. That's fine. But then when I realized, oh no, that's not, I have another option. So we just try to create, like you said, that community, that space, that other voice in their head to say there is another way. It's not that hard. It's just a matter of committing and sticking to it. And so that's what we do. It's called The Fit Mess. You can find it on this podcast player or whatever you're listening to now, or at our website, thefitmess.com.
Right on. All right. Well, folks, I will drop all of both these guys' contact information, all their social media, their podcast where you can find that, all of that into the show notes. You guys can find that there. So Jeremy, Zach, I want to thank you both so much for coming on the show and not just sharing your story and your journey and your thoughts with us, but really being willing to be vulnerable, for being willing to step outside of your comfort zone and to overcome that, we talked about that imposter syndrome, and to boldly shine a light on a subject that frankly doesn't get a whole lot of light shined on it these days. Really commendable stuff you guys are doing. I'm so glad I found your podcast. I'm glad I connected with you guys. So thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Right on. Okay, that's our show for today, folks. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I want to let you know that we have other free resources over at silveredgefree.com. There, you'll find our free guides with our top tips on nutrition, exercise, and healthy lifestyles to assist you in your weight loss and fitness journey. So feel free to head over there and download anything that looks useful to you. I'll put the links to everything we talked about in the show notes, and you can find those over at silveredgefitness.com/238. As we wrap up our time together today, you can show your support for this show in two important ways. The first is to tell a friend about this podcast and encourage them to give it a listen. The second is for you YouTube folks to click the like and subscribe buttons, and for you podcast folks to please give this podcast a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, and be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss any future episodes. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today, and until next time, stay strong.